Yo, Ian. Hey, thanks again for the tip about the player housing thing. Yeah, I got my video out a few weeks ago, so I'll probably get at least like, I don't know, 8 to 10 more views out of it now. So that's really gonna help. That's really gonna help a lot. Appreciate it. Beard looks great, by the way. Yeah, no, you totally rock that. Yeah, no, keep the beard. I like it. All right, talk to you later. What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and yeah, we're going to talk about Warcraft Direct today. There's a whole lot of really fun and interesting and exciting, and just honestly, a lot of really interesting stuff came out of the Warcraft Direct that I'm excited to talk about. But let's go ahead and start off. Let's just talk about player housing for a second. To be clear, because I've had a few people asking me this already, yes, I did just do a video talking about player housing in WoW like 3 weeks ago. No, I had absolutely no idea this announcement was coming. Just to explain myself a little bit, I just didn't have like a pressing topic for that week. And I keep a list of things that are like considered quote unquote evergreen topics, things that I can go back to at any point and be able to talk about for the show. In cases where I'm like, okay, I don't have something important to talk about this week, so let's go look through this list of topics and grab one out of there that seems interesting. Excuse me. And we had just been talking a little bit about player housing while I was streaming, just like doing some delves and stuff a few days prior to that. So I was like, okay, I'm going to grab that. I don't have anything else to talk about. I'm just going to grab something from the list. Hey, I was just talking about player housing on stream. Let's talk about it in this episode. That's where that came from. I had no idea this announcement was coming. Obviously, I worked at Blizzard for a while, and I had heard some rumblings about like, ooh, if we ever did player housing, would it be like this? If we ever did player housing, it would be like that. And I knew that there were people inside of Blizzard who wanted to produce player housing. That was something that I knew that much, but I had zero actual concrete information about anything that was actually in the pipeline, let alone an upcoming announcement. So that was purely just coincidence in that regard. I will take some credit for being timely with that. I think that's still just a good mark of me as a content creator. I'm able to figure out when a topic is something that's like I can pick a topic that seems like it's ripe for the pickings. But no, I did not receive any actual, despite my little intro there, I did not receive any sort of tip about that. So please don't come at me. There was no like leak or anything, at least as far as I'm concerned. That said, it is very interesting to me that they chose to announce player housing. And like literally the only detail that we know about this is that it's coming in midnight. That's it. That is the extent of the knowledge that we currently have about player housing. This was very much a tease. And then it said World of Warcraft midnight at the end of it. So that's pretty much it. That's all that we know. It's interesting to me that they decided to tease a player housing feature coming in the midnight expansion without saying anything else about midnight through this entire Warcraft Direct. And the reason that's interesting is just because you kind of have to stop and think, okay, oh, what was this in terms of what was their communication strategy here? What was the PR strategy behind putting this tease here? And it could be as simple as they wanted some sort of very cool, like, oh, just one more thing, like Steve Jobs Apple style reveal to drop at the end of the broadcast. That could very well easily just be it. But there's also like there was content creators like myself just making independently videos about player housing. There was also a whole bunch of content creators who are not me that I had seen talking about player housing and being like, oh man, surely it'd be really, really cool if they announced player housing at this event that's coming up. I don't know if any of them knew anything either. Some of them have already said that they didn't. It just seemed like good timing for them. But it's also possible that Blizzard was concerned that this information was actually being leaked, in which case they might want to get out ahead of that with this tease. So I don't know. It's just something interesting that I thought about. Like, okay, you're talking about a single midnight feature in here. Normally, when you're announcing an expansion feature, you want to keep that with like the expansion announcement, so you can talk about everything else that's coming along with that expansion. That's not what they did here. They've teased a upcoming expansions feature without any other information about that. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about the midnight announcement as we go through this video. I don't know. That was just something that stuck out as interesting to me because there has to have been some reason why they wanted to pull that specific feature so far ahead. It could just literally be the case that they wanted that like mic drop moment of here's something super cool to end off our broadcast with. And player housing is a super cool thing that people have been asking for since day one of World of Warcraft. But who knows? Maybe there's something else going on there. And like I said, this really was just a straight up tease. Like we just see a guy walking into presumably his house. He then pulls a mug of whatever's been sitting on his fireplace the entire time he was away. Like that, as soon as he did that, I was like, huh, how long has that been sitting there? Are you just keeping that there? Is that like, anyway, it doesn't matter. Like day old tea sitting on the top of you. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like I said, sits down, sets the mug down. It says home sweet home. And then we see the midnight logo. And that's basically it. In fact, I don't actually, I didn't check this, but I don't actually recall the words player housing ever appearing anywhere. It's just clearly an obvious tease in that direction. So we know very, very little about this feature. And normally when we get teased with something like this would be the point where I then speculate a bunch about what that feature could possibly be and how it could be done, how it could be implemented, and how that could match up with other things inside of the game. But I just did that 3 weeks ago. So if you want that extra insight, go watch the video from 3 weeks ago. It's titled like, should WoW add player housing or something like that. Should be pretty easy to find. Go check it out. There was a bunch of other big news announced for the World of Warcraft, for the modern game of World of Warcraft. We are going to talk about Classic. We'll get to Classic stuff in a minute. But let's talk about some of the other stuff that was announced for modern first. Plunderstorm, for example, we already knew that Plunderstorm was coming. They'd previously announced Plunderstorm. There was some weirdness with it, like being included in an announcement and then removed from that announcement. And then I think it got added back in later or something. I don't know. That was a little bit weird. But we knew that Plunderstorm was coming early 2025. And they were going to do another round of that. What we didn't know prior to that was this change that they announced during the Warcraft Direct, which is that they're moving to a plunder store, a different method of actually granting out rewards. It's not just a straight linear progression like Battle Pass style where you get a thing at each tier of it. You actually, it sounds like at the very least, you're going to earn some sort of currency, and then you can use that currency to pick and choose which rewards you want to get in which order. And that's a really interesting thing for me to point out because that is another thing that I did a video about. That video was several months ago, but there was a couple of videos that I did about Plunderstorm. And one of the things that I ended up talking about regularly through that time period was how I felt that the method by which rewards were being distributed was not great. There was room for improvement for it. I'm not going to say it's wrong or bad, just as we were playing through Plunderstorm and as I was seeing the people who were playing through Plunderstorm just wanting to get the rewards and didn't actually really enjoy the game mode that much. One of the things that I was talking about at the time was, man, this would be cool if you could just pick and choose the rewards that you want. So that way you don't have to spend more time in this than you want to. But also you get to grab the ones that you're really excited about in whatever order you want. And then if you want to go and get all of the things, you can do that. Or you can just get the big couple of big ticket items and buy those instead. It'll be interesting to see how that ends up affecting Plunderstorm in terms of ongoing player count and so on, because it's quite possible that with fewer players dropping into matches just because they want to get their points and get out so that they can advance their renown track, there could be fewer players that are actually able to complete to actually pull the match together. But at the same time, I feel like there's enough people that enjoyed Plunderstorm and would enjoy Plunderstorm. And especially if the other rumor that we've been hearing is true, where Plunderstorm will now be directly integrated into the modern game. So it's like something that you queue for from your player versus player interface instead of something that you run like a separate mode of the client for. It could be something that they can counteract that way. Again, I'm really excited for another round of Plunderstorm. I think that's going to be super fun. I'm looking forward to it. So that's exciting for me at the very least. I'm also very excited about the Undermine patch. I've been a huge fan of goblins and goblin lore and everything that goes on surrounding goblins in WoW for the longest time. In fact, when Cataclysm was announced and we were told that we were going to Kazan, this goblin island of Kazan, and we were going to get to go around and actually experience like where goblins are from, I was super stoked about that. And I've played a lot of goblin. Not all my characters are goblins, but I've played a lot of goblin characters ever since then. I'm currently role playing as a goblin in my D&D campaign that we do on Mondays live on Zarina's channel on Twitch TV. So definitely check that out. It's called Arctis. You can check it out. Super fun. I'm role playing a goblin over there. Big fan of that. So I'm naturally very excited to be going to actual Undermine and actually seeing what's going on there. I think it's very smart to have included Undermine as part of the War Within, because obviously underground expansion, Undermine is an underground area. It's been thought of and like people have rumored like, yeah, Undermine, that's totally going to be the next expansion for like ages, all the way back to when people first started talking about the potential of a South Seas expansion. The concept of Undermine as a expansion focus has been floated around, and it's never been something like, as much as I love goblins, I don't think a whole expansion themed around Undermine would make any sense. But having it as one of the major content updates for an existing expansion that's already underground themed, that fits in very perfect. That sounds good. That makes sense. So big fan of that. Really, really excited to see where that heads. The driving stuff they were talking about for Undermine was very interesting too. It really sounds like they're kind of taking maybe even some of the behind the scenes tech that they built to make skywriting work, and they're now applying that to driving. So kind of just coming full circle. Hey, let's make flying mounts more interesting. Now let's make ground mounts more interesting too. And they're definitely going in depth with it. There's definitely going to be some physics and stuff involved. And the reason I mentioned that is they were talking about like having different parts on your car, like different tires or whatever, that could adjust like your acceleration, adjust your drift as you're like sliding around corners and so on. Which also then in turn means that there's likely to be a lot of like actual straight up racing elements that are implemented along with this. So that's very exciting for me. I'm looking forward to seeing more about it as we get closer to release. We also finally got a look at a 2025 roadmap for World of Warcraft, very similar to the one that they released early on in 2024. This time we're getting it prior to the year actually starting. We're getting it, it's obviously it's November, so we're getting it towards the end of the year, and we've got an idea of just in generally what they have in mind coming out in the following year. And what's really interesting about roadmaps like this is you can kind of sit and look at some of this stuff and go like, why is that there? Why did that specifically require a call out? So a couple of things, the good immediate example on that, there's a couple of points where they mention warbands updates throughout this. There's one in the Undermine patch 11.1 where they say there's going to be a bunch of warbands UI updates and something called warbands camp collections. That's interesting. Don't know what that is, but the term camp there implies to me something interesting about like the collection of your characters that are sitting around, like basically the login screen. Are we going to be able to start putting your characters in different spots sitting on the login screen? That could be interesting. And then later on for 11.2 in the summer, they also just straight up say warbands updates. Don't know what that is as of yet. And it's possible that Blizzard doesn't know what that is as of yet either. They just know they want to add more stuff for warbands, and they're going to figure that out as they get further along in 11.2 development. But it's interesting that it was something that they felt was worth calling out on this roadmap as its own bullet. On a similar note, they also have bullets for both Children's Week and Brewfest updates, and no other like holiday events or anything like that are mentioned. So specifically Children's Week and Brewfest are getting called out here, which again is very interesting. I feel like Brewfest got a bunch of updates relatively recently, but when I say that relatively recently, could be like 5 years ago at this point. I don't know. Children's Week has just kind of been there for ages. I'm really curious what they have in mind for updates for Children's Week. Maybe we're getting away from, hey, take this orphan into a battleground so they can witness repeated murders. Maybe we're getting away from that. Maybe we're going into, I don't know what that could potentially be, but Children's Week is something that it's just been around for a long time. So the idea of it getting out some updates is interesting to me. Brewfest similarly, but what's more interesting than specifically those events is the fact that, again, those two were called out specifically. No other holiday events were mentioned. That's interesting to me. There's a couple of things that are being returned to or being brought back that I thought were really interesting in the roadmap. One is Horrific Visions being revisited. That's probably related to whatever this Nightfall new content is going to be, which is coming in 11.1.5. I initially thought Nightfall, that's what happens before midnight, right? That's a great thought for a pre-expansion event. This is 11.1.5. There's a whole 11.2, 2.5, 2.7 that they've got on this roadmap past that. So whatever this is like leading up to what will eventually be the release of Midnight, not necessarily Midnight itself. This is not a pre-expansion event. So not really sure what that is. But I do fully expect that it will come with some sort of revisiting of the Horrific Visions feature. And I really liked Horrific Visions. I know they were sort of, there was a lot of split feelings about it. And especially as those then went into, like that concept went into Shadowlands. I think Torghast ended up kind of ruining a lot of people's perceptions of what Horrific Visions were, because it was kind of a similar general concept in terms of how it was played out. But I actually really liked Horrific Visions. I like that feeling of trying to become more efficient and more efficient and more efficient with a run each time. It reminded me of the vault runs all the way back from Mists of Pandaria a little bit, where it's like, okay, the first time I went in here, here's how far I got, and then I had to get out. Then I got a little bit farther, and then I had to get out, and so on and so forth. So I'm excited to see Horrific Visions come back and get to mess around with that a little bit more. I know it's something of a dividing feature, but I'm excited for it. They also mentioned that they're bringing back the Turbulent Timeways event, which I didn't get to experience that the first time because it was during Dragonflight and I wasn't playing at that time. But I'm excited to see how that ends up turning out. It does seem like a little bit more muted of a feature because it basically, at least from what I could tell the previous time, it was just, hey, it's going to be time walking for a few different weeks and there's some cool rewards you can earn. But hey, it's a game about earning rewards. So having something that's earning more rewards, it's always nice to have. They did note the expansion reveal for World of Warcraft Midnight is coming at the end of the summer, which is only really interesting to me just as a side note to an additional point that I was already planning to make in this video, which was a lot of people were theorizing that World of Warcraft Midnight was going to be like straight up announced as part of this event. And a lot of those theories, the logic I was given for, or I was seeing for that was, well, they're not going to do it again this same time next year. That'll be too late. So they have to do it now. It's important to remember that BlizzCon isn't a thing anymore. We're not tied to that yearly announcement cadence. Blizzard can announce their expansion whenever they want. And in fact, that wasn't even something they were really tied to before either. We were announced like Legion, as I recall, was announced at Gamescom in like August or something when that announcement happened. So interesting to note that end of summer time frame. This is prior to, it's after 11.2, but prior to 11.2.5 and 11.2.7. I'm not expecting there to be an 11.3. So this is the expansion being revealed, probably going into beta very soon after that, because they're going to want like 11.2.7 timeframe is end of autumn. That means they're probably going to want a winter release sometime early in 2026 for World of Warcraft Midnight, which in turn means that this expansion reveal is probably going to be the game in the expansion in a more complete format than it has been for a lot of previous reveals where it's still very, very early development. So that's kind of what I'm guessing from it at this point. Obviously, this is still a ways out, so we'll know more once we get closer to that time. And then there's two other really interesting things that we can call out towards the end of this roadmap graphic. One is a little bit more obvious than the other as well. And the obvious one is this weird little rune thing that we see on a little banner towards the end. It's a very, very similar sort of thing to what we originally had for the tease of Plunderstorm in the prior year's roadmap, where it's just, there's a little icon. What does the icon mean? What could it possibly mean? Well, there's a few possible guesses we can make here. The way that the rune looks, it's very easy. You could say it's tied to earthen. Looking at it, to me, this kind of makes me think maybe it's something related to delves, because it's this little, like, it looks like a cave going into the side of a mountain, which is kind of like what a delve is, right? So this could be like one theory I have potentially is that similar to how Plunderstorm is like this PvP focused game mode that will now exist inside the game. Maybe this is something that's more like delves, like maybe it's competitive delves in some fashion or something. I don't know. That's a thought that I had. Who knows if that's actually going to be the case? But that's something that I thought was interesting. One other theory has been, well, it kind of looks a little bit like a house, right? So maybe this is something that is tied to player housing. Maybe they're going to release that. Obviously, this is after the expansion reveal for Midnight. So maybe this is like a pre-release player housing thing being added prior to the actual launch of the Midnight pre-patch and stuff like that. That's possible. One other really, really interesting theory that WoW had reported on, someone on Twitter had originally noticed it, is that this is actually like the thing that it's sitting on is actually part of the world map, part of the Azeroth world map. And specifically, if you match up with where this rune is, it is sitting directly on top of Northrend. Now, it's possible entirely that they just wanted it to look like a bit of map. So they just grabbed a bit of map when they made this asset and dropped that on there. But given how particular they tend to be about these sorts of things and how they love to hide little teases and stuff inside of this thing, inside of these roadmap images. And we're going to get to another one of those in a second. It's kind of lending extra credence to this theory. I feel like that's maybe intentional. I feel like there's a not guaranteed intentional, but there's a higher chance than usual that it's intended that this rune happens to be sitting directly on top of Northrend. So maybe whatever it is somehow related to Northrend. Maybe it's delves inside Northrend. Maybe it's something about Like, just thinking out loud here, obviously we had a lot of things going on related to the Nerubians in the War Within. Maybe this is going back to Northrend, where the Nerubians existed inside that environment. Maybe we're going to Ajal Nerub at this point. We're actually going to go there and do something in some sort of limited time event or similar to Plunderstorm up in there. I don't know. There's lots of stuff we can theorize about this. I would love to hear what your theories are as well. If you want to leave a comment below, please let me know. I'm really curious what everyone's take is on what this little rune thing might mean. The other little tease from this graphic is that the bar where they have like winter, spring, summer, autumn, winter slowly turns like that chaos green color towards the end of it. And that's interesting for a few reasons. One, it doesn't change color anywhere else. It's not like this is a gradient that was like going in and out of different colors. It's only towards the end of it that this color actually changes. And two, the classic roadmap, which we're going to talk about in a minute, the classic roadmap doesn't have any color changes in it at all. So this is an outlier. This is something that is different and interesting and thus worth considering as part of this actual graphic. Again, theories about what this could mean. I don't think this is meant to be leading up towards midnight, because midnight, like the color for midnight is already, it's very purple. If it was going to be leading up towards midnight, I feel like this would be a purple gradient, not a green gradient. It has this sort of chaos green to it. What does make me think of in terms of that chaos green is Legion. That expansion was a very green expansion. There was green all over the place. So one of the dominant theories there that I've seen that I kind of agree with is maybe this is heading towards the announcement of Legion Remix. We had Mists of Pandaria Remix. I wouldn't blame them at all for skipping Warlords of Draenor Remix. I don't think anyone would be upset about skipping Well, there's probably some people who would be interested to go and check out that content again. I'm sure a Warlords of Draenor Remix could actually be made in an interesting way. But I think if we're going to remix loved prior expansions, Legion is prime material for that. And that green color, that's very, very similar. Even with the little, like there's these little swooshies in the background of it. That's very similar to the graphical assets that were used during Legion. So very possible that that's kind of what it's leaning towards here. I don't know. Again, this is another thing that could literally be nothing, but I don't think it is. I think that's a tease. Anyway, that's all the stuff that I really wanted to talk about for the modern game as far as what we got from Warcraft Direct and we got from looking at this roadmap graphic. Let's switch over and let's talk about Classic a little bit. There were a couple of big announcements for Classic. One of the biggest one is that they have now officially confirmed that Mists of Pandaria Classic is going to be a thing. And that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, I mean, it's just interesting in its own right. Hooray, Mists of Pandaria Classic. It was a very loved expansion. But the thing that sticks out to me about this, I remember when we were talking about Mists of Pandaria Remix, there was a lot of theories that said, oh, so they're going to stop doing Classic with Cataclysm, right? So this is that the Mists of Pandaria Remix is now replacing what Mists of Pandaria Classic would be. That is clearly not the case. It's now confirmed they are actually moving on to Mists of Pandaria Classic. And I want to be clear, I think that is the correct choice. Like, even though Mists of Pandaria Remix means that a lot of this content will be less novel for a lot of players, there will be a lot of people who go, oh, I just did that with MoP Remix. I don't necessarily want to do that again with MoP Classic. I think that player base is pretty separate from the player base that would have been excited about MoP Classic in the first place. There'll be some overlap, but I think there's still a lot of players who would be more interested in MoP Classic. And the reason for that is a lot of the nostalgia for Mists of Pandaria actually comes from the systems design and the raids as they were intended to be played. Not what MoP Remix ended up doing, which was basically plowing through the quests and then getting so powerful that you can go and solo the raids. Like, even Blizzard in their announcement pointed out that the systems and raid design were very, very good in Mists of Pandaria. So I think there's a lot of players who would be very, very interested and excited to go and experience that again and get to actually progress through Heart of Fear, get to actually progress through Throne of Thunder, get to spend 16 months in Siege of Orgrimmar again. Please don't do that, Blizzard. Please don't do that to us. But actually getting to go back and experience all of this content again, and have that progression experience going through it again, and getting to experience those classes as they were back then. Like, Mists of Pandaria Warlock is still, in my opinion, I enjoy Warlock in War Within. I think they did some good things with it. But Mists of Pandaria Warlock, Affliction in particular, is the best version of Affliction that we ever had. Like, that to me is how Affliction should have played, and honestly should still play. It was so fun and really, really rewarding to play. So I am excited about the potential to go back and do that again. see all that expansion again, see all that content again, and maybe even have the ability to progress through it with a raiding guild again. I think that would be fun. I am super curious if they're going to make any specific changes for PvP, because Mists of Pandaria PvP, maybe there's people who miss the 60 plus minute like just endless lock shaman matches that could go on forever in arenas because no one was dying. Maybe there's people that missed that. I think there's probably more people like, this is when dampening first came into play, where this stacking debuff, it doesn't exist anymore, but there was a stacking debuff that would reduce the amount of healing that you were doing just over time. And that originally kicked in at 10 minutes. Like if you went 10 minutes in a match, that was when dampening started to stack. And it was so bad that we were even when we were doing the Arena World Championships and stuff at the time, I was commentating these matches. We would almost just be like sitting back, just like shooting the breeze, waiting the first 10 minutes of every match. And honestly, the players kind of were too, because it wasn't until dampening actually set in that anything was likely to happen. So I'm curious if they're going, like there was a later version of dampening that kicked in at 5 minutes. I think that was added during Legion, actually. They brought it up to 5 minutes. Maybe they'll start with that. Also, dampening originally wasn't added until the end of Mists of Pandaria. Maybe this is something that they add towards the beginning of it so that it can help shape the overall metagame a little bit better, so that we don't end up with every team being lock shaman and something else, or, you know, TSG or something like that towards the end of the expansion. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I'm really curious what, if any, sort of quality of life changes they're going to make along those lines, especially because I feel like PvP is one of the areas of Mists of Pandaria that most needs some of those later quality of life changes. The other big World of Warcraft Classic announcement was we're getting World of Warcraft Classic. That's just what I'm going to call it. Experience it again for the first time, for the second time. But no, they've announced that there's going to be fresh, they're calling it 20th anniversary realms for World of Warcraft Classic. And I know that's something that a lot of the classic audience, like the hardcore OG vanilla players, have wanted for a while now, is some fresh servers just to do that whole progression thing again, because so much of that original game is that progression. So much of that original game is getting yourself to level 60 and then going through all of these raids and so on as they release. That is the core of that game, more so than any expansion that was ever released. That leveling experience and that feeling of going alongside the rest of your server, getting yourself up to max and so on. It wasn't that rush to endgame like we see in the modern game and like we've seen in WoW for a long time. It was a lot more about the journey back in those days. And experiencing that journey alongside other players makes it more interesting, which is why fresh realms are so exciting for the classic, like hardcore classic audience. And speaking of hardcore, I didn't actually mean to use the word hardcore there, but that is another very interesting thing about this announcement, is that they directly stated that hardcore realms will also exist alongside this. There will be fresh hardcore realms. And this also means that hardcore realms are going to get the phase rollout that they didn't get otherwise, because everything was already out by the time that the hardcore realms first hit. So this means that your hardcore characters, you'll be able to level up your hardcore characters and then actually have the phase rollout with those characters as time goes on. So a lot of interesting stuff happening, even though it is just like I said, experiencing it again for the second time, for the third time now. There's actually a lot of interesting stuff going on there. And I almost forgot to mention one other super important thing that they announced about these 20th anniversary fresh realms is that these realms will then move on to the Burning Crusade. And I know a lot of classic players almost consider Burning Crusade to just be another phase of vanilla, because it was really like Burning Crusade was the expansion that was most like the original game and felt the most like a content update for the original game. Obviously, there were still some systemic changes, like they dropped to 25 players and so on. But I know that a large portion of the classic audience is also very passionate about the Burning Crusade. So that's very exciting to see. And I'm actually very strongly considering trying to make a hardcore run all the way to TBC this time around. They also talked a bit about Season of Discovery, but honestly, not much. They, even in the roadmap, Season of Discovery kind of trails off towards the end of winter. There isn't really anything from spring 2025 and onward that's really of anything for Season of Discovery. It does say they do have a bullet in their roadmap that's talking about new endgame content. We don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. But after that, there's nothing for Season of Discovery, though. That whole band just like fades out of the thing. So a couple of interesting things to theorize about there. Could mean that they're just done with Season of Discovery. It's a season, right? Could just be that this is finally the point. It'll have been like a year and a half, almost 2 years by the time this thing ends. So yeah, that could well be just them saying, yeah, we're done with Season of Discovery. It's over now. We don't need this anymore. It could also potentially be the case that they do want to do something new. There is a bullet on the bottom of both roadmaps. It is the same text on the bottom of both roadmaps, but it does say more news beyond this roadmap to be shared, and feature will evolve based on player feedback. Content and timing subject to change, blah, blah, blah. But it does say, essentially straight up says, there's going to be more stuff after this. And I think that is probably truer for Season of Discovery than anything else on either roadmap. Just because, not that it's not true for anything else, but it's the most true for Season of Discovery, because from the beginning, Season of Discovery has been something that they've been very much trying to mold it around player feedback and trying to make their changes and make their announcements based on what they're hearing from players. So it is entirely possible that they just want to ride out the rest of Season of Discovery before unveiling what exactly they're doing next that's along those lines, because they want that time to be able to respond to player feedback and be able to incorporate everything that they've learned about Season of Discovery all the way up till the very end. I would be very surprised, especially considering the Classic Plus surveys that went out last year. I would be very, very surprised if this is the end for something that's like Season of Discovery. I would not be surprised if they decided not to do another like quote unquote season. That's essentially kind of what the Fresh Realms are anyway, is a new season for WoW Classic. Instead, I'm wondering if maybe they want to take this time to then decide, okay, does Season of Discovery move on to TBC? Does Season of Discovery, does that end? Those characters go away and we come out with a new thing that's like Season of Discovery? Is it time to actually pull the trigger on a proper Classic Plus? There's so many different ways that they could go with this. And I think like that's at least my theory and my hope of what we're seeing here, because I loved Season of Discovery. I think like the later phases kind of fell off for me, but the earlier on Season of Discovery was so much fun. And I would love to see them try that again with the knowledge and the experience and the lessons that they've learned having run a full year and a half of Season of Discovery. That's what I'm hoping for. So who knows? Maybe that's what we'll see. But as of right now, we don't really have much in the way of details for Season of Discovery coming up in 2025. There's a few things that came out of the Warcraft Direct that weren't directly related to World of Warcraft either, but are still Warcraft and are still interesting enough that I want to talk about them here on the show. The first one being the remasters of the original two games, the Warcraft Orcs and Humans, and then Warcraft 2, plus I'm assuming Tides of Darkness is also in there as well. Warcraft 2 Tides of Darkness, and then Through the Dark Portal. I'm assuming that's all in there as well. So we're getting StarCraft remastered style remasters of both of those games. Plus some quality of life updates, which is good, because if you've tried to go back and play those games nowadays, like Warcraft 1 in particular, it's really rough. Like you can only control one unit at a time. You have to move everything around. It's painful trying to play that game with just the modern mindset for how an RTS should work. So I'm glad that they're doing things like increasing the limit of units that you can have selected at a time, actually giving like bounding box unit selection for Warcraft 1 and so on. And it'll be really interesting to see how the modern gamer and a lot of people who never played those games in the first place, how you feel about them once you actually get around to playing them. Warcraft 1, I have a feeling the biggest feedback we're going to see around Warcraft 1 is, wait, this is Warcraft? This is what this all came out of? Because Warcraft 1, let's be honest, was really generic. It was basically just, let's make a real-time strategy game where there's orcs and humans. What do we call it? How about Warcraft, Orcs and Humans? That was it. That was the pitch for Warcraft 1. And isn't a ton in the way of like story or lore that actually happens in it. There's some orcs, there's some humans, they fight, go. That's Warcraft 1. It wasn't until Warcraft 2 that storytelling really started to take a central thread inside of the Warcraft series. And that's where a lot of the seeds were planted for what eventually became Warcraft 3, which was a very, very heavy storytelling experience for RTS and blossomed into the entire like Warcraft franchise and universe and mythos and so on. But even then, Warcraft 2 has been in dire need of a remaster so that you could go back and experience the bits of storytelling and the seeds that were planted there in a way that doesn't make your eyeballs bleed. So I'm excited for both of those remasters, and I'm really looking forward to playing them. The other big announcement, which wasn't that much of a surprise, I think we've kind of known this was coming for a little while, but the big announcement today for Warcraft 3 Reforged is that the 2.0 update is out. Like literally, it's been released at this point. You can go play it. The 2.0 update is out. And this really felt like they even said it in their video, like when something is broken, you need to fix it. This feels like, I'm hoping at the very least, a commitment to actually delivering on what Warcraft 3 Reforged was originally meant to be. It's been well publicized at this point and well talked about. I'm not going to go into all of the details here again. But Warcraft 3 Reforged definitely fell kind of flat compared to what players were expecting, and even to what Blizzard originally said that the game was going to be. It fell flat. They ended up offering refunds over it. Like that's how flat it was as a result of that. So I'm hoping that this means we can finally get the Warcraft 3 Reforged. I haven't had a chance to play it yet. I'm definitely going to be checking it out real soon. But I'm hoping that jumping into this means we can finally get the Warcraft 3 Reforged experience that we wanted all those years ago when it was actually announced. Because it's a game that just has such a strong connection to a lot of players like myself, who it was where we really, like, I played Warcraft 1, Orcs and Humans. I played Warcraft 2. Warcraft 3 was where I really started to understand, like, oh, wait, hold on. There's actually, like, the story here actually matters. Like, there was a story, like I just said, in Warcraft 2, but the story in Warcraft 3, you're like, oh, these are characters. I'm following what's going on here. I'm now invested and interested in what's happening with these characters. So I would really love to see this game finally get the treatment that it actually deserves and get that full Warcraft 3 Reforged experience that we've all wanted for so long. Very, very hopeful about that. And I'm hoping this is an ongoing commitment to do right by Warcraft 3 Reforged. They talked a bit about Warcraft Rumble, so I'll talk a bit about Warcraft Rumble. First thing I'll mention is that a lot of the Warcraft Rumble updates were relatively like tame, and like, remember, this game has been out for a year. It doesn't have as much behind it, and most of what they've been doing post launch is just sustaining what they did at launch, essentially. So this game doesn't have as much time behind it as other titles, so it's not surprising that they didn't have some big, grandiose, crazy reveal for Warcraft Rumble to come out as part of this event. They did reveal a couple things. One, which is the bigger news to me personally, is that they're finally going to actually do a PC client for Warcraft Rumble. That's great. I mostly played it on PC before, but it was through an emulator called BlueStacks, which can be a little bit janky because you're basically then just running a version of an Android phone on your PC and then running the app inside that thing. It's just a little bit janky. I'm hoping that the PC client isn't just that, but packaged up, because a lot of the PC clients for mobile games are really just, let's build an Android emulator and then let's put our game inside of it and just make it automatically launch that, which then just means that a lot of that jank comes along with it. Things like having to, instead of having a scroll wheel that functions, you have to like click and drag to scroll things up and down because everything has to be emulating a finger tap. I'm hoping that it's going to be more involved than that. But I have seen PC versions of other mobile games in the past that end up being along those lines. So let's hope, fingers crossed, that it's not just that. Also hoping for things like being able to do different resolutions and so on, and having a better interface, things like key binds and so on. Like that would all be very, very good and would be stuff that I would like to see for this. So hopefully that's the direction they're going with the PC client for Warcraft Rumble. They also announced Split Heroes. And I haven't been keeping up with Rumble as much to be able to really say exactly like how impactful that's going to be. But I do like the concept because I like the idea of opening up more army types and having like, because one of the things about Warcraft Rumble back when I was still playing it pretty heavily is that it was basically like, oh, you want a Rend army? This is the Rend army. This is the good one. This is the Rend army. Do this. And sometimes maybe in PvP you'd adjust a little bit, but there was always like a best army for each individual character. Now, at the very least, for some of these characters like Sylvanas and the other ones that they announced, we will have the potential of, here is the Horde version of this, here's the Undead version of this, here's the Blackrock version of this, here's the Dragon version of this, or whatever. So I don't think Dragon is even a mode or an army type, and you know what I mean. We'll have the option at the very least for like, oh, you want to play Sylvanas, but you want to play Sylvanas as Horde, or you want to play Sylvanas as Undead. You have those options now. There's different, it basically just opens up 2 army types per champion instead of just 1. That's interesting to me, and I hope it works out. And last on the list, we'll talk a little bit about Hearthstone. Now, I will admit, I have not played Hearthstone in a while. Last time I played Hearthstone regularly, it was when Battlegrounds had first come out. I have not really played it much since then. I'm kind of keeping up with Ben Brode's more modern work these days. I play a lot of Marvel Snap. But anyway, looking at Hearthstone itself, two big interesting things that happened there. One was the new arena mode announcement and the arena updates that are going along with that. I am out of the loop on Hearthstone Arena. This is not something that I can really sensibly comment on. And I couldn't really follow exactly what they were talking about through it because I don't have that up-to-date context. So if that's an exciting thing, if the new underground arena mode is exciting, please leave a comment. Let me know what I'm missing about this that makes it so good. Again, if you're a up-to-date Hearthstone player, let me know what you think about that. I did also think, however, and I think a lot of people were kind of surprised by this a little bit, the announcement that Hearthstone is now going to have an update where they include several StarCraft characters as playable heroes, and so on, for different classes inside of Hearthstone. That's really interesting. Hearthstone now branching out into other franchises from Blizzard than just Warcraft. They're now branching out to actually incorporating other IPs than just Warcraft. The stuff they talked about there sounded really interesting to me. Playing as Jim Raynor, playing as Sarah Kerrigan, playing as it's not Zeratul, Artanis. There we go. The less interesting Protoss hero. playing as Artanis, playing as Sarah Kerrigan, playing as Jim Raynor. That's interesting, and the fact that each of them covers multiple classes, that's interesting. I don't know. There's a lot to consider about the possibility of something like Hearthstone as a franchise actually taking on other sorts of characters from other franchises than just one, kind of going off and encompassing different Blizzard franchises. I wonder if Blizzard would ever consider releasing some other kind of game that covers multiple Blizzard franchises that you could then play as different characters from inside those different franchises and match up against each other. I don't know. That's probably a crazy idea. Probably not something that they would ever actually do, but I think it'd be really cool if they did that again and kept up with it. Anyway, backhanded comments about Heroes of the Storm aside, that's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you again for my patrons. I apologize for the weird cadence that my updates have had over the last couple of weeks here on YouTube. My streamathon is still ongoing. We're about to start day 25 of the streamathon. I started at 5 days. We're at day 25 now, and it's still going. So thank you so much for putting up with my weird timing on YouTube in the process. And thank you so much again to my patrons, especially for putting up with that, because it's meant that my early update perks for Patreon have been a little bit weird. Hopefully I managed to get this video together in time that you get at least a little bit of a heads up on it. But I do have some other updates coming for Patreon very soon. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/devilore. You can sign up over there. Also, I didn't get to any questions in today's episode because I wanted to take the extra time to talk about the Warcraft Direct stuff. But if you have questions, I do normally love to answer those questions here on the show. If you have questions stemming out of this episode, especially, like, heck, we could make next week's episode a fully Q&A episode if you guys have enough questions about it. So please either go over to Patreon if you're a patron, because you get one of the perks is that you get first crack at having your questions answered. Find the posting for this episode over there. And there will be a link to a form in there that you can use to submit your question. Or if you're not a patron, you can still submit questions. Just leave them as a comment here on YouTube. And I will do my best to get to as many of those questions as I can, especially like next week's episode. I feel like there's going to be a lot of questions that are still to come out of all of this. A lot of fun theories to speculate about. So hit me with your crazy stuff. Let me know what you think. What is that rune? Why is that thing turning green? Why is Hearthstone becoming Heroes of the Storm? Like, let's talk about that stuff. It's very interesting things. There's a lot to think about there. Also, we have some new merch available once again over at my merch store at devilore.com. Not only do we still have the Sounds Good Make Sense merch available, and also the Officer Kitty Cat merch, but as part of the streamathon, we unlocked the Devil Love emote merch. I'll put it up somewhere on the screen here. But it's a cat with heart eyes. It's very cute. It's been an emote of mine over on Twitch for a long time now. And now I've got a high-res version of it, so we can print that out on some merchandise. If you're interested in owning a mug or a shirt or a hoodie or a hat or whatever with an adorable cat with heart eyes on it, head to devilore.com. There's a bunch of options over there. Patrons and Twitch subs do get 15% off, so check all of that out. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks again so much, everybody, for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.